Welcome to Commander Central episode 322, and today we're going to talk about whether or not Boros is now better. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
Max and Chris, how are you guys doing today?
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's Friday. It's good. We're good.
We had a week off because we were just, it was mass chaos after being gone to Command Fests, and I had to do a work trip, and so we didn't record last week, but everyone is back and mostly rested up and energized and are ready to go. Mostly.
I was going to say, rested, maybe not. No.
We're getting there. I'm slowly recovering.
I have a lot to do yet today, so...
And now you're going on a camping trip, aren't you, Chris?
Yep.
Nice. Well,
Don't get eaten by bears.
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
You should know me better than that, buddy. I'll sacrifice the kid instead.
Oh. You don't have to be the fastest, you just have to not be the slowest.
Yep, no.
Well, when this show airs on Monday, we'll be, about closing in on 2 weeks away from the Command Fest in Indy, which I am going to too. So if you happen to be going to Indianapolis for Command Fest, I will be there. Just shoot me a message on Twitter to try to find where I'm at if you want to play a game. So I will be looking to play with anybody who wants to play. So Command Fest Indy, which is I believe the second weekend in July. If you're looking for a game, I shall be there.
Cool.
And hopefully we'll get some announcements. Rumor is they'll announce some more Command Fest for the fall. And I was told supposedly Minneapolis is on the list. So we're hoping we'll have at least one more that's close for all of us to go to as well.
You know what? If there is one at Minneapolis, Dana, I'm not going to tell you I'm going, and then I'm going to go, and I'm going to message you on Twitter with like some weird random Twitter account and be like, hey, I want to play a game with you, and then see if you actually come play a game with me, and I'm going to be sitting there like all disguised up and just,
like, you look just like Chris. Couldn't be. He got eaten by bears on his camping trip. In the long con, pretending you were eaten by a bear. Well, hey, if you out there in listener land have anything fun planned for your weekend or have built any new decks or want to just say, hey, how'd you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, you can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central. And you can also find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central. Check out our reward tiers like joining our community to chat with us and play virtual EDH.
And since we were just briefly talking about reaching out if you've built new decks, Chris, you said you're building 4 new decks. Is that
4 of them? Yes,
correct?
I have plans for 4 of them right now.
Are they all with relatively new commanders, or who are you brewing? If you don't mind sharing.
So I'm brewing a mono red, and I'm going to run partners of Jessica and Rogarak.
Okay.
Rogarak.
Yep. Just because, so when you cast Rogarak, it actually helps with putting loyalty counters on Jessica when you end up casting her, because it says whenever you cast a commander or whatever, sure, then you add the loyalties to Jessica when you cast her. So, I mean, it makes sense to go with that route. Plus, the ability to use Jessica to give a creature like triple damage is really powerful, I think, in mono red. Then I'm going to build a 5-color deck of some sort. I want to do Planeswalkers because I don't have a Planeswalker deck at all.
Okay.
So I don't know how I want to do this one for sure. It's probably going to be back to my Approach of the Second Sun type of deck, more than likely. Then I'm going to build a Crick Son of Yawgmoth or whatever it is. And I'm going to build this as mono black. Like I've always been talking about like the Battlecruiser type deck. So I'm going to use this as my Battlecruiser deck. Because nice. It allows you to reduce the casting cost. Plus, black has all your options of like your Cabal coffers, all that stuff, to elevate the amount of mana that you're already making so you can cast the really big spells. And then finally, I'm going to build a huge troll deck that's going to be Urza, Lord High Artificer, and it's going to be all counterspells. Counterspells and artifacts. And I'm only going to have Urza as the creature in there, and I'm going to try to win the game that way. Just because it is a troll deck for a certain person that plays at our shop that gets a little salty when he's playing when people target his stuff, so I'm just going to not let him have stuff to begin with.
That, sometimes you have to fight fire with fire.
Yeah, just to show him that there's more to the game than just, getting upset over things getting destroyed. Just be like, well, I'm just not going to let you have anything anyway, so now you can see this aspect of the game.
Sure, I get that. Max, do you have anything on your plans? I know you don't brew that often, and you did just build Gnawbones, so I'm guessing no, but I figured I would ask.
Nope, just time to tune Gnawbones after quite a few games in Vegas, so...
Cool. Did you ever finish that red-black deck?
Obosh?
Yeah,
I have an Obosh deck.
Did you finish it up and tweak it at all?
I haven't tweaked it much, but it's pretty much still in the state it was when it was gifted to me.
Okay. All right. I thought about building Obosh too, because I think it looks really fun. And I like the stringent rule of only whatever, odd CMCs. So
Yeah.
I finished my Dramoka the Eternal deck. We had talked about that. We did that show, I don't know, a month or so ago about commanders that we thought were underplayed. I wound up not building the Voltron deck just because I kind of realized, it would just fall apart the second somebody cast a Fleshbag Marauder or something if I only have one creature. So I did wind up building basically Selesnya Dragons. And it's been really fun so far. I've only played it twice or 3 times, I think, and I definitely need to clean some things up. The CMC is just too high. It's too slow. And that's going to be a little bit of a problem no matter what when you're casting, 7-drop dragons exclusively. But green can handle that. I think I just need a little bit more ramp in there so I'm not so reliant on hoping no one can remove my stuff. But that deck's been a lot of fun.
Do you have the new dragon in there? The white, ancient white dragon or whatever?
I did not. I have the green one in there. I didn't put the white one in there. And my reasoning was because it makes those 1/1s, then my bolster triggers will all wind up going on to those small creatures that are easy to remove. And I want them to go on those big dragons.
That makes sense. Makes sense a lot.
Yeah. So otherwise I would have. But no, I do have the green one in there, but not the white one.
Please tell me you're playing Icing Death then.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
I also have the land in there, the Cave of the Frost Dragon or Frost Worm. And I have a Ozolith, and there's also an enchantment that works similar to Ozolith, whose name is escaping me right now, so when something dies that has a bolster counters on it, I can save those counters and put them back on something, even that land if I need to when I turn it into a dragon. So
the Ozolith is a disgusting card. I know I played that. I
cannot believe it costs 1 mana. That's insane.
Yeah, I played it in Modern, I should say, before Luris got banned on Hardened Scales. And that's dumb when you're like doing all these like sacrifice triggers with all these counters and they're just, I move like my modular counters here, plus I put them on the Ozolith. Now I go to combat and move all the counters from the Ozolith over here, and you can just like one-shot someone. It's crazy.
Yeah, for 1 mana, that card does so much. It's just nuts. Which is why it's expensive too, I guess, at this point.
Oh, is it? I don't even know. I got them right away when they came out, so...
I theory crafted out a deck this morning I put together. I sent the link to Max, and I actually, I need to tinker with it. I might try to put it together because it's not super expensive. There's a new commander from Baldur's Gate, Saravok Deathbringer, mono black. At the beginning of each player's end step, if no permanents left the battlefield this turn, that player loses X life or X's Saravok's power. And he has to choose a background. So I was going to pair him up with Raised by Giants, the background that makes your creature a toughness 10/10. And then just run a bunch of the Eldrazi that make Scions and spawns. So I always have a creature I can sacrifice or something that's like just available there for me to pop whenever I need to. So I always dodge that trigger. The problem with the deck, and I think I might try it anyway, just for the heck of it, but like there's treasures everywhere. So like basically a simple treasure just turns off my ability to deal damage to somebody, let alone if someone has a blink deck or just cracks a fetch land. There's just so many ways to like just not get to hit someone with that trigger. And in black green, it's not like I can run effects that prevent sacrifice or something. That would be a white thing. And then like I would lose Raised by Giants and whatever. So I do think I'm going to try it out because it's actually looking at it like how I would build it. I can put it together for maybe $40 in cards I don't have. So I might as well try it just to see if it works. If it doesn't work, who cares? I'll take it apart and I'm not out much other than, having to buy the occasional Kozilek's Predator or Awakening Zone or whatever that I don't have. So I am going to try that, and I think I'll bring it to Indy, and, if it gets shut down every time someone cracks a treasure or fetch land, then I guess so be it.
That is still going to be awesome, though, when it does go off.
When it does work, it'll be funny, yeah.
I guarantee it's going to work in one game because people are just not going to understand what's going on, and they're going to be like, oh,
wait, I take 10 damage? How did that just happen? Yeah, so... We'll give it a go. Also, I want to put this out there. I have talked about our buddies over at the Legendary Creature podcast. I'm a big fan of that show. They've been offline for a couple weeks due to some family stuff they've been recording. And they just recorded a show. They called it their therapy session show, where basically they spent like an hour talking about, their problems with deck brewing. Like it was just like 2 dudes talking, right? I mean, like having a therapy session about Commander. I'm just glad they're back recording when they can. They're not going to be on a consistent schedule for the next couple months because of family stuff. But I'm a fan of those guys. They do a great show. That their therapy session show they just did was excellent. Give them a listen. I'm a fan of those boys, and they do really good work. All right. Anyway, let's move on to talking about the main topic here, whether or not Boros is better. Boros has had a lot of problems in Commander for a lot of years. The reasons that I guess I hear cited most often are a lack of ramp, a lack of card draw / card advantage, and the strength that you usually see for red, white, and Boros are aggro, which is something that doesn't scale nearly as well in a 40 life 3 opponent format as it does in a 20 life 1 opponent format. So let's, I guess, start by answering that question, and we'll go out from there. And I'll ask you guys, I'll start with you, Max. Do you think Boros is better now than it was, 3, 5, 7 years ago? Let's say when you first started playing. Do you think that do you think Boros has gotten better? Have they kind of figured it out?
Dana, that's a decade. That's a decade ago.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Thanks for making me feel old, Max.
You're welcome, guys. You're welcome. If you would have asked me this like 3 months ago, I would have probably said no, Boros isn't better yet. But since like Baldur's Gate and some stuff we're getting reprinted in Double Masters 2 Electric Boogaloo, I definitely think Boros has gotten much better. And I honestly think it comes down to like the mechanics that have been reprinted recently, such as Myriad and Goad. We just got a bunch of cards that use those 2 mechanics that kind of shorten up the downfall of, being aggressive. Because if you can make multiple copies of a single creature every time you attack, you can start hitting your other 2 opponents at the same time as the one person you want to take out. And Goad is just a great defensive strategy in a multiplayer format. So I think those 2 strategies alone really have made Boros a lot better amongst a lot of other things I'm sure we'll talk about during the show. Okay.
How about you, Chris? What are your thoughts here? Do you think they have, even if they haven't entirely solved it, have they done a better job of getting it where it needs to be?
I think so. I've never thought that Boros was like bad per se.
Sure.
It wasn't great, but I look at it in the means of, each color has their strengths and weaknesses type of thing. So if you stick to that kind of thing, you have to live with it. Now, we got all these awesome cards like Max was saying. So, I mean, yeah, it got way, way, way better. But I think it was also a preference for people. Like, if you liked the color combination of Boros, you loved it, even when it was bad in other people's minds. So I don't think it's really, fair that we can say that it's better. It's, for us, it's better. For other people, it's just like, oh, now we're God tier type of thing. Right.
Yeah, I agree that they've come a long way. Boros is way better now than it was when I started, for sure. There's a couple of reasons for that, though. First of all, they've gotten better commanders. There was a real lack of interesting Boros commanders, 5, 7 years ago.
The same. That was the worst part.
And they've done a much better job giving us some ones that do interesting different things. So to start with, it's just a more interesting color pair than it was once upon a time, because there's commanders that play a little bit differently. Things have really come a long way since Anya, Merciless Archangel, wasn't a precon. But I would say primarily the reason Boros is better is because I think red is way better than it once was. White's gotten some cards, but they feel way more conservative and way more niche than the stuff red has gotten. I think red is the reason Boros is better. And the reason I say that is because, like, at least looking at my decks, I see a lot of the good Boros cards, the good red ones, are good enough to show up in my decks that aren't just Boros. Like it's not like the cards are just good enough for Boros or good enough to show in other colors. And I don't see nearly as much of that from the white cards that they've given us to, like, quote unquote fix white or Boros. Looking at my lists, at least, Outpost Siege is the first one that kind of jumps out at me, but like I've got Outpost Siege in decks that aren't Boros or aren't mono red. Like that's a good enough card that I will run it elsewhere. Valakut Exploration, Light at the Stage, Ignite the Future, Jessica's Will, Curse of Opulence, Dockside Extortionist is insane. Glittering Stockpile is one. Cursed Mirror, Stolen Strategy. There's a bunch of cards, and I'm just like focusing on card advantage here. Like there's obviously, you get good dragons and good angels that will show up elsewhere for sure, but like if we're talking about the weaknesses of Boros that we talked about, one of which is card advantage or card draw, the fixes they've put in place for red are good enough to show up elsewhere. Curse of Opulence is a good enough card. I run that in decks that aren't just red. Dockside Extortionist obviously is insane. Jessica's Will is insane. The resource and card advantage engines they've given to red aren't just for Boros. They are good enough elsewhere. Whereas if I look at white, Smothering Tithe is great and shows up in a ton of places. Maybe Esper Sentinel, but the white card advantages and card draw things they've given us are just for white or maybe Boros. They aren't good enough to come elsewhere. So I think that's the big difference. I think red has gotten stuff that's so good, they're just good cards, whereas white's ones are good white cards, right? They're like good enough in your mono white deck maybe, or your Boros deck maybe, but they're maybe not good enough to show up elsewhere. So the amount of red, and even beyond that, I'll just say in general, looking at going back like a year or so, I went back through most of my decks. The amount of red cards I add to red/X decks, so like Gruul decks or Rakdos decks or whatever, is way higher than the amount of white cards I add to my Selesnya deck or my Orzhov deck or my Azorius deck. So it's not even just the card advantage ones. I feel like just red cards in general wind up in my red/X decks way more than new white cards show up in my white/X decks.
I see that all the time now. Yeah, now that you mentioned that, I'm thinking back, and I see that all the time out of people. You see a lot more red good cards than you do for the white stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's probably some design reasons for that. Again, a white tends to favor weenie creatures, and red Impulse Draw is just good enough that they've started using it for an archetype, like Prosper, Tomebound, and Feldhorn. The Dreadwolf Herald are commanders that care about doing Impulse Draw, like they've used that for an archetype. There's no white deck where the theme is playing catch up. That's not really a thing. So like there's some reasons for that are logical, like within the bounds of the game. Some of the red stuff just scales way better. I didn't even mention like looting effects because I tend to not use those, but like there's a lot of synergy with looting, putting stuff in your graveyard, whether it's with madness effects or reanimator or whatever. And again, there's just no real weird synergy you get where, hey, that person has 4 more lands than me, so I guess I get a land. Like there's just nothing else that really works for that for the most part. So like game mechanics kind of limit that too, and the way white works, I guess, kind of fights against white, whereas like they found ways to make red scale with the rest of the game. But yeah, so I think Boros has gotten better, but I think it's because red has gotten way better. So I've been talking for a long time here, so I'm gonna throw it over to Max for a second. Max, what do you think has gotten better about Boros that you've noticed in your like decks or in decks you've played against?
So this mainly comes from decks I've played against because I don't play Boros.
Sure.
But I saw a lot of Boros decks in Vegas. I think I played against one almost every other pod, and they were all different commanders, but I think I saw like Osgir the most.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think the commanders in general are what have made Boros better. Osgir is super popular. Chris, you're on EDH Rec. What's the number there?
Osgir is the number 1 Boros commander with 5,519 decks.
Awesome. And then Feather backs that up.
Feather is number 2 with 4,868 decks.
Thank you, Chris. I think those two alone are great commanders. The unfortunate thing with Feather is I think all Feather decks are kind of the same, or at least the ones I've seen. They like to do that cheap instant speed spells to, do the Feather thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what I also like is all the partner combinations we've gotten since Commander Legends 1 and now with the backgrounds and whatnot. There's a lot of cool ways to do not just your typical Boros, Army in a Can, or Voltron things now. I mean, Arden and X makes a really killer deck whether you want to do equipments or not, but it makes it a lot easier. Where in the past,
yes,
Boros commanders that want to do Voltron, you had to do something like one of the Akiris or some random red-white commander that has nothing to do with artifacts, but it'll punch you in the face really hard, something like Aurelia or Gisela. So the amount of Boros commanders we've gotten in the last few years, I think, has just helped a lot. The fact that there's more to choose from than just, here's a soldier, here's an angel, and here's a god. Those are pretty much what you saw prior to that.
It's funny you mentioned that, Max. I was just thinking about there was a time many, many years ago, the first Boros deck I had built was Brian Stoutarm.
Mm-hmm.
And we were playing, and I think it was in the shop, the first shop we played at here in town, and everyone's like, oh, what are we going to play? And I'm like, I'm going to bring up my Boros deck. I want to play this new one I built. And someone else is like, oh, I've got a Boros deck. And I was like, hey, let's just all play a Boros pod. All 3 decks were Aurelia the War Leader. And again, we're talking like, 9-10 years ago. But at the time, there was just so few good Boros commanders. Everyone just built Aurelia. It was basically Aurelia. Like, I just remember being like, oh, I suppose that makes sense. It was Brian against Aurelia v. Aurelia v. Aurelia. And yeah, and things have gotten way better in that front. There's just a much wider diversity of different commanders with different playstyles for sure.
They need to give us back the legendary rule where it was all across the board, you can only have one of that legend on the battlefield.
No.
I actually had to, in a game the other night, I had no way to kill someone's commander to deal with it, but there's a new creature from Baldur's Gate, Furbog Flautist, and it's like
that sounds made up. That sounds completely made up.
Kidding. And when it comes into play, it does like an active treason effect where you gain control of a creature.
Okay.
And gives it haste. But the creature also has myriad. It's like, that's how I had to kill their commander. I had to take control of the commander and then attack with it. The myriad trigger happened and made 2 copies of it attacking other people. And I let the commander die versus the token copies because of the legend rule. And then the tokens only at the end of turn. But like, that's what I had to do to kill a commander, was take it and make a myriad copy and have it kill itself.
I like it a lot. I like that a lot.
So, back to Max's point. Yeah, that's definitely something that I've noticed. And even as popular as Osgir and Feather are, and I know people that have Osgir and Feather decks, I don't think I played against either of those 2 commanders at either of those 2 command fests I've gone to, of Vegas or Richmond. I played plenty of Boros decks, but like even as popular as those 2 are, I just saw plenty of other Boros commanders that weren't those 2. Chris, how about you? Like, what have you seen among Boros that makes you, when you play against the decks, that make you feel like they've gotten better?
Oh, when I play against them?
Yeah,
nothing.
You're like, oh, this is easy. It's Boros. It's easy mode. I got it made.
Well, when you sit down against a Boros deck, most of the time, like when I've played against them, it's always been like newer people who are building them. So you know exactly what to expect. They're going to have the best of those cards, or they're strictly hard on a certain theme. So you just know what to expect. And been playing for so long that you just, you can just outplay them type of thing. I haven't really played a good seasoned player who spent a lot of time building a Boros deck. So, and that's what I've been looking for, someone who wants to do that. Like, give me a really good Boros deck and play against me with it, and then I can give you a better judgment on it.
Sure. Yeah, I currently don't have a Boros deck, and Max, you mentioned that you don't either. So, like, I've been building a lot more red stuff, but yeah, I still have not found the Boros commander that I really love and that, like, makes me want to build that deck. So, although things have gotten much better, there's still definitely some problems that the decks still for the most part tend to want to win via smashing people in the face.
Yes. Now, I've seen a lot of decks that have been playing like Red X or White X that have gotten 100 times better, but not the 2 together.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Again, or at least when they do, it's because Red has gotten better, not necessarily because White stuff has gotten that much better.
Yeah.
They're just so conservative with White. It's so weird. They're so afraid to give White powerful things for some reason.
Yeah, I'm flipping 3D Trek right now, and like, you look at like the top red cards, and like the top 1, 2, 3 of the top 8 cards are new red cards. You go into White, and there is 1, I guess if we go to Smothering Tithe or Esper Sentinel that are in the top 8, but that's been years since those have come out.
Right, yeah.
You go down and we're like 12 or 20 before you hit a Chromoswell, which is the next newest one. Otherwise, they're all the same old cards that people have played before.
There's an interesting... I have a note here about that. I think part of that, to a degree, is they kind of peaked too early in terms of getting White, particularly removal, let's say. Red, of course, didn't have... I guess there's Lightning Bolt, and they've never been able to top Lightning Bolt either, nor should they, because that would impact a bunch of other formats. But Lightning Bolt in Commander doesn't necessarily scale that well, so like they can make things that are maybe better removal spells and not have them impact other formats. Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile are crazy efficient, and there's no way they can basically make targeted removal in White that's better than Swords or Path without causing huge problems in other formats. So as a result, people are still running Swords and Path. And like,
Yep.
there's no new additions really to White's removal suite for the most part, at least in terms of creature removal, because they can't do a better job than the two cards they printed, one back in 1994 and the other one in like 2000.
So a good example of that is Solitude. Like, it's not on the list, of the top,
Sure.
20 or 30 cards or whatever. I still don't see it on here. I'm scrolling down looking for it. But that being printed into Modern, everyone's playing it. Everyone who can play it is playing it. So, I mean, that just shows how powerful an ability like that is.
To make a white card be impactful in a world with Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile, it shows up in other formats.
Yep.
It has to be, it's that good. Similarly, like looking at White's ramp abilities, it has those catch-up mechanics, but they printed land tax back in the Legends in 1994 or something, and I think Tithe was in Alliances, which was, 1996 or 7 or something. Again, 1 mana spells that get you multiple lands into hand. They're just never going to give you something better than that. So as a result, if you're going to, do a land catch-up, and assuming you can afford land tax and Tithe, those are going to be better than anything new they're ever going to print. So like they have this, that's another problem. Whereas when Red didn't really start getting Impulse Draw until basically Outpost Siege in Tarkir, they've been able to find ways to, hey, that's kind of Red's Phyrexian Arena, and then they've been able to give us one-off effects and stuff, and print multiple ones that are maybe better than one another in different ways, but like there's not that one amazing spell that they can't top, or that 2 amazing spells they can't top. And in White, they just can't top Swords and Path, and they can't top land tax and Tithe.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset that White is specifically designed to be a support color. I don't think they're ever going to make it its own, single, this is, awesome as itself. It's meant to be supported in another, color combination.
So Dana, you talked about White having the catch-up mechanics, and we've talked about in the past how, a lot of the White cards say if an opponent controls more lands than you or has more cards in hand than you, then do this. I think we're starting to see that change, though, with the most recent pre-con decks. So like Smuggler's Share, they're now moving all this to, at the beginning of each player's end step, do something if the opponent did something. So like draw a card for each opponent who drew 2 or more cards this turn. Create a treasure token who had 2 or more lands enter the battlefield. Like, I think they figured out that White needs a balance of, at the beginning of your upkeep, type of catch-up effects like your land taxes and your ties, or you need these at your end step, at every end step type of catch-up effects as well. And I think they're finally turning that corner and realizing that White/Boros would probably benefit more from at each opponent's end step or each end step than checking at the beginning of your turn to see if someone has more lands than you.
Yeah, that's a real good point.
You think maybe it's like thematic? So you think about White, like the overall like story of White and everything, and like White's like, you're holier than thou, good guy type of thing, and the good guys always are one step behind.
Somewhat. Yeah,
and then
at the end
they build up and then they win type of thing. So I wonder if that's like kind of a thematic thing that they have going on.
And that's good. Like, I like that too, to a degree. I want the colors to play differently. I don't think White getting, harmonized is interesting at all, as good as it would be.
Oh, I would jam that into many decks so fast.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
You want to see a $20 card?
and actually, I missed Smuggler's Share, Max. I think I didn't go to the 2 most recent sets, but Smuggler's Share is a really good card. And actually, I will to build on your point there. I think the other advantage of things like that is they stack.
Yeah.
The problem with land tax is you're going to go get a couple lands. You can still only play 1 per turn in White or Boros for the most part, and who cares if you've got a Tithe and a Gift of Estates along with your land tax? Like, you're not getting extra effects. Whereas the way Green Ramp works, if you have a Nature's Lorn hand and you draw a Cultivate, you can still cast both of them and ramp out double lands. I mean, maybe this isn't ideal, but like they stack.
Yep.
And that's one of the things when they switch to when your opponent casts their second spell per turn or draw their second card or whatever it is. If you have 3 of those out, 3 different versions of that or something, you still get the effect. Like the effects stack. I think that's one thing that they had a problem with a couple years back when they first started doing the catch-up stuff, was this, you don't want a bunch of effects that wind up being not even redundant. They just don't work if you have more than 1 out. And I think they've kind of done they've been doing a better job of making the White stuff work if you have multiples of those effects out. So I'm going to guess in a couple of years, we're going to be much happier with White now that they've started moving in that direction for sure. What do you guys think of the other thing they've tried with white that, you draw 2 cards, or your opponents draw a card, or one person draws 3 cards and you draw 3, like the...
Secret Rendezvous?
Yeah, the Secret Rendezvous kind of effect. Or we just got the one whose name escapes me where all of your opponents draw 1 card and you draw a card for each one they've drawn this way. What do you guys think of those kind of like sharing effects where someone draws but you also draw with them?
That one's tough for me because, I don't like giving my opponents that extra advantage, but if I want to sit down and just like have a fun time, that seems like that would be fun to do. Now, if I want to sit down and actually, play, be more serious playing, I want to get the win out, that kind of thing, then of course I don't want to do that. So it's kind of hurts me overall, but I mean, if you're playing just straight mono white, that is phenomenal because at least you're getting something out of it.
Well, and I get how if you're playing competitive, those where like anyone can win at any point in time, you definitely don't want to give your opponent 3 cards because there's just no such thing as somebody being out of those games. But like, at least the power level I play at, there's almost always somebody who either you can make a deal with, be like, hey, I'll give you 3 cards, just don't attack me for a turn or something.
Don't trust those deals ever. You listeners out there, don't ever trust those deals. I mean,
don't do it with Max, but like somebody else that you can trust. You could... No. Or there's somebody who like, they're just clearly not a threat. They've been board wiped down or had, bad luck with lands or whatever. And you're like, oh, I can give them 3 cards. And even if they're not like going to be thankful, it's not going to matter because like they're so far behind or they're at 6 life and they're going to die next turn anyway. I think particularly if you're not playing at the super high power level, I think those are okay. I don't mind Secret Rendezvous at all. I think there's particularly like in mono white or something, that card wouldn't bother me. I feel like I can work around that, either making a deal or giving it to somebody who doesn't matter for the most part. Sure.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I mean, I have seen that in many games where you sit down and we're on turn 8 and someone's still stuck on 1 land. And if I had a card like that, I would definitely try to get them in the game. Because I know what it feels like, sitting there for 45 minutes, not being able to do anything. Yeah. It's like draw, go, and you're just like, well, this sucks. I mean, you kind of just want to scoop the game and go somewhere else and find somewhere else to play. But I mean...
Where I really noticed that was with Baleful Mastery, the black removal spell that I think is 4 mana, and you can cast it for 2 if somebody draws a card.
Yep.
There was enough times like when I was testing that card out, I'm like, oh, I can give the card to this person who is also kind of maybe not my ally, but like we're trying to kill this other person over there, and that card's going to get used against that person who's winning the game. Or I'm going to remove a thing and give the card to the person who I'm going to kill. Like I'm going to do this thing and then swing through and they're dead anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I have seen that backfire, though, and personally, like, sometimes, I've had it happen to me where, I'm behind and someone kind of, like, pities me like that, and then I can keep that in my mind and just be like, okay, so they've already pitied me, so they're not going to be worrying about me so much.
Sure.
So I can keep slight tabs on them, kind of help them nuke out the other side, all the while I'm, like, building my hand to just take them out at any point in time type of thing.
Yeah, no, it definitely can backfire for sure. Yeah. But for the most part, I'm like okay with that mechanic. I don't want too many of those. I don't want 6 different versions of Secret Rendezvous in my library, and I'm giving away that many cards. But like, I think 1 of them or 2 of them in a deck, you're probably going to be okay, particularly if you're playing Boros or mono white.
Yeah, I mean, what was the first one that we got like that? It was Kyrnos and Tyrael or whatever.
The non-black 4-color commander.
Yeah. The 2 brothers or whatever they are, those 2 guys there.
I believe they were a couple,
Correct. Oh, okay, well.
Correct.
There we go.
Okay. My homies over there, that's what we're going to call them then. They, I remember when that first came out and people were playing that and it was like, oh, cool, I get a card out of this and everything, And, it actually gave that color good play. I mean, but it's also a 2/8, so it's like impossible to kill at the same time, but...
Yeah, they've definitely experimented with that over the years for sure, and it's something that they're definitely testing it a lot more, particularly in mono white, definitely. So Max, what is it going to take to get you to try to build another Boros deck? Like, what do you want to see? Is it the interesting commander, or do you think they need to make just more cards to continue to get Boros up on par with everything else? Like, what's holding you back from brewing Boros?
I honestly think we're probably a couple sets away from having just enough cards doing the right things to make me want to build Boros again. I like the idea of Boros. I like attacking, so this should be right up my alley. But I would probably go back and rebuild the original Tajik again just because that was my first Boros deck and would probably like to see that return. And either do the army in the can thing or do some Voltron-y fun stuff. But yeah, I just think a few more cards that can bump up that ability to keep up with the rest of the table will probably make Boros a lot more appealing to me.
Okay. How about you, Chris? What's holding you back from brewing your first Boros deck here?
The color red is just better on its own type of thing. Like, honestly, it is like red does everything by itself, that white is already giving aside from like enchantment removal and stuff like that.
Sure.
So there's really no point in playing white combined with it because red can just do everything by itself, or red is better with another color. So unless I got something phenomenal in a white that's going to actually support red per se, way better and not be stuck in a certain theme, then I probably just wouldn't ever build one.
What about you, Dana?
So based on the fact that I've built a mono red deck pretty recently and felt just fine about that, there's definitely enough pieces there. I don't think that's a lack of pieces for me. And white has a few as well. So that doesn't, it's no longer an issue where I feel like there isn't enough stuff in Boros in particular from the red side of the color pie. For me, it's more, I just haven't found a commander that really works for me yet. And I don't know why that is. In part, I would say because Boros tends to care about creature damage / aggro. And a lot of my oldest decks are creature damage-ish aggro kind of decks. So it's an archetype, I guess, that I've got multiple decks that do that. And the more decks I get, the more I keep trying to find something that just doesn't look too much like previous decks of mine.
Yep.
And so as a result, I just haven't happened to find something in Boros that jumps out at me and makes me want to brew it yet. I just haven't had something that clicks. What I might wind up doing, and I haven't figured out where I'm going to go with it yet, my mono white deck currently is Zero with Eyes Open as my Super Friends deck.
Yep.
Which was fun to do because mono white Planeswalkers seems really dumb and limiting, and I like that idea. The problem with the deck is it's so slow. I can win games with it, but it takes forever for me to get the right pieces out and then make enough tokens to kill people, because that's my win condition. I have to kill people with tokens.
Yeah, usually when I've seen you win the game too, you're already so far ahead, but you can't get the kills in, but at that point, people, if you were playing competitive, you would just scoop because you're on a time frame, a time crunch type of thing. But in Commander, you would not, so people are just playing it out. Yeah. So honestly, it's not like you're playing super slow, it's just that you got to actually get the kill in.
Yeah. So as a result of that, what I was thinking, there's a new commander from Baldur's Gate. When a permanent comes into play with a counter on it, you put an additional counter on it. So you could use that with Planeswalkers.
Yep.
And it also has background. So I could still run white Planeswalkers like I wanted, but I could also pair up one more color and I could do something. So I could do whatever. I could make it, Azorius or Orzhov or Selesnya or what color combination I wanted to do. I would have that option to still do a limited 2-color Super Friends deck versus 1 color, but then pair it with something that would make it easier for me to actually finish games off versus making everyone wait as I try to make enough Elspeth tokens with Catherine's Crusade out to be able to finish somebody off. So I might wind up doing that with my mono white deck, and I've been thinking about doing that with Boros. So I've been kind of looking at what different backgrounds I can maybe pair up with that commander and pair it up with Boros and see if I can do something that way. I haven't really settled on anything yet, but it's something I'm kind of looking at right now.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, that's what it is. It's just nothing has clicked with me in a way. And if I started all out right now, that might be different. If I had no decks, then I might be able to put something together in Boros. And I'm the creature aggro damage, that's perfectly fine. But I just have enough decks to do that already. I just don't need another one. And that's what Boros tends to lean into. So. Yeah.
I'm looking through all the legendary creatures in Boros, and they're all so similar. It's it's almost disheartening.
Yeah, they've had a real problem with that for a lot of years. Like I said, Aurelia was the standout for a long time. At least they've gotten away from that a little bit, but they still do very much tend to lean into creature damage, and I said I've got decks that kind of do that. So,
although it would be absolutely amusing to play General Ferocious and just play all the wacky multicolor Boros cards just to make
as many of those tokens as you can. Yeah,
play some random.
That was one I had looked at once upon a time.
Yeah, some random red-white card that does nothing on the game state, and just be haha, I get a 4/4 out of this. What's up?
One thing I did notice too, when I was going over the stuff, I read off a bunch of red cards, red card advantage cards or resource advantage cards that show up outside of mono red and Boros for me. I said I didn't have a bunch of white cards. I didn't have white cards that did that. However, what I did notice is in recent years, they've done a very good job of printing white board wipes that work in different ways. Like I remember when I first started, you put a Wrath of God in your deck, and if you could afford
command.
and if you could afford the $15 for a austere command or something, maybe you ran that Day of Judgment. Like there was just a limited amount of white board wipes. There's so many good ones today that do different things and function in different ways. And like, oh, this deck does this certain thing, so I want this particular board wipe. This deck does something a little bit different, so this board wipe makes more sense there. They've just done a really good job with giving us a diverse suite of white board wipes that work in different decks in different places. So like that's one thing I think they have done an excellent job with in recent years is giving you a bunch of different options there versus, they can't top swords and path like I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Are there any of those that you guys have really found yourselves using or liking?
Oh, I'm still a Wrath of God guy, by far.
The efficiency is tough to beat for that, for sure.
Yes.
I'll be you, Max.
Yeah, I'm the same. I like the classics Wrath of God. I like Settle the Wreckage. That's one of my favorite board wipes, even though it's only one-sided. Typically, it only hits one player.
You have blown me out with it before, though.
I have. I don't like Farewell being cast against me, I can tell you that much. I did like it when the person realized they couldn't, the person did just one mode, and then like 5 turns later, they're like, wait a minute, I could have done all 4. Oh, I'm like, well, too late now.
That card is ridiculous, yeah. Vanquish the Horde, kind of White's Blasphemous Act is fantastic. I just put Damning Verdict in my Dromoka the Eternal deck. That's destroy all creatures with no counters on them.
Ooh, that's really good too.
Yeah, because the bolster trigger, I'm almost always going to have creatures with, and I have a bunch of other things that give +1 counters on that deck as well. So like my creatures just always have counters on them. It just works out that way. So there's a lot of those where like I'm not going to run that in every deck, but it's amazing in the one deck where I run it.
Yeah, that's like what's the enchantment one where it destroys all creatures that are enchanted or whatever?
Winds of Wrath, I believe.
Yeah, if they kept printing board wipes like that, I would be thoroughly, I would just love it because it fits themes. I like thematic themes that you can run like that, so you can just stick to it because it makes the game more interesting to watch and be like, okay, how close are they sticking to this theme? And then when they win, when they're on that theme hard, they feel really, really good about their deck.
Absolutely, yeah. I much prefer those cards that are like, oh, this is really good in this one deck.
Yep.
Versus cards like, say, Smothering Tide that are great in every deck. So yeah, I like the kind of weird niche stuff for sure way, way better than things that just are universally, super useful. Just like there's a lot more room for like kind of customization of your deck than I think feels like.
Yeah.
The other thing I think White they've been working on with White is White has a lot of board wipes, but there's been a lot of additions to ways to dodge board wipes. The kind of flawless maneuver kind of cards where your stuff all gains indestructible till end of turn.
Chroma's Will.
Chroma's Will does both. It's a way to dodge board wipes and it's an offensive threat by giving yourself double strike. It does all the things you want to do. That card's crazy good. So that's one thing I think White has added to in recent years. I think that has helped White in general, but as well as Boros. Because again, that actually synergizes well with aggro. If Boros is looking to do aggro stuff, then you kind of have to throw a lot of resources into putting creatures in the board, and then you're at the risk of getting blown out by those board wipes.
Yep.
Being able to counter those by Teferi's Protection out of it, or a Flawless Maneuver out of it, or Eerie Interlude or something. And then your opponents have burned a bunch of resources too, trying to board wipe, and hopefully the other 3 people have all gotten hit, and you've been able to dodge it. So I like that thing they've leaned into in White a little bit. I don't think it's nearly as powerful as red stuff, but I do run a few of those cards as well.
Yeah, I'm very surprised the amount of those special cards like that I've been seeing people play recently too. Like I just played a couple games the other night, and I was using one of the store owners' decks, and I was able to use the green one. I can't even think of the name of it. The one colorless in a green or whatever.
Oh, Heroic Intervention.
Yep, I was able to use that twice.
Oh, card's insane.
And I was just like, these cards are awesome. And I used it once to block and save my creatures so I could kill on the crackback. And then the other time I just used it to save from a board wipe. And I'm like, this is insane.
Oh, that card is so good. Yeah. Yeah, so of course the best one's in green. I guess Teferi's Protection's up there too. But
well, so here you go. out of the top 100 cards that are multicolor, the first 4, 5, 6, 7 of them are mana rocks, so we're not going to count those, okay?
Sure.
They just don't count. So the number one that's actually a multicolored card is Boros Charm.
And Boros Charm is really, really good.
Yep. And that is the number one multicolored card is a Boros card.
I actually killed somebody. I played a couple games recently. A friend of mine had a bachelor party, and it was just he had a bunch of guys playing Magic, basically. And we played precons first, and then we played everyone busted out their decks. And I didn't bring a deck. I just had the precon with me. So I borrowed someone's deck, and it wasn't Boros. It was 3 colors. I think it was Mardu. But I was able to kill someone at the end of the game with Boros Charm.
4 damage to the face.
Always feels real good. 4 to the face. So yeah, Boros Charm's excellent.
Yes.
But that's actually another thing that I do think is interesting. When you think about multicolored cards, at least when I've had Boros decks in the past, you had plenty of red cards and plenty of white cards, but I do feel like there weren't a lot of good red and white cards necessarily that went in those decks the way there are in other colors. Max mentioned Farewell, or, if you're playing Orzhov, Farewell is crazy good. Merciless Eviction is really good. Damn is really good. Mortify, Vindicate, Utter End, Anguish Unmaking. Like, there's a bunch of good Orzhov cards you would play in an Orzhov deck. I feel like there's not a ton of good Boros cards that you would play in your Boros deck aside from maybe Boros Charm.
I'm looking right now, and I way down on the list, and I still haven't found another one.
Yeah.
Okay, I found Wear Tear. There's Wear Tear.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, so that's also, I think, and I'm not sure why that is, but no, I definitely think there's a lot of the 2-color cards that people run in decks. There's a lot more good ones in other color pairs than there are necessarily in ones that are specifically white and red cards too.
Well, I think a lot of the newer Boros cards that have come out, the actual red-white, is create X/1/1 creatures and give them haste and stuff like that. So it doesn't really play into how EDH wants to play. Now it plays in your standard formats or Pioneer or whatever, sure. That's no issue. But in this format, they're just no, it's not good enough for the amount of mana I'm spending into it. Yeah,
again, that comes back to that aggro thing where aggro just isn't as effective for 40 life among 3 players as it is for 20 among 1. So
yeah,
that's the reality. That's just a tough thing to fix. We don't want them to break standard or modern or something just to add a few EDH cards. So I do get that.
I mean, they could just give it to us, in our Commander Legends 3 that they have coming out here in a couple weeks.
For sure. Yeah, a couple weeks. Yeah, it definitely feels that way. Okay, any final thoughts here before we wrap up from anybody? Max, got anything? Any final ideas here or things you want to talk about?
No, I think we covered everything I wanted to talk about.
How about you, Chris?
Boros. I just can't get behind it for some reason, and it bothers me because I love the color combination overall, in other formats, but in EDH, I can't get behind it.
It has not gotten all the way there, although it's gotten better, definitely.
Yes.
White just needs to start pulling its fair share of the weight, the way red has been, I would say. Okay, that is going to wrap up this episode of Commander Central 322 Is Boros Better? Thank you very much to our editor, Rafael Garcia. You can find them on the Twitter birds at Ursa Bearwalker. I am Dana. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. And we'll be back next week with another show. Until then, I am Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.